Scary Good.
Welcome, boys and ghouls, to Scary Stories NYC on the Scary Good channel. I'm your hostess, Madeline Starr. We've got some strange tales tonight. Why don't we let Bigfoot start off? Bigfoot?
Thank you, Madeline. Don't worry, folks. She'll be back later with some scary stories for you. If you're looking for part 2 of this morning's daily Dogman episode about the family being haunted by dogmen, you're in the right place. But before I get to that story, I want to share a ghost story sent in by someone from our chat who has been requesting I get to his email. We haven't done ghost stories for a while, so it took some time to get to it, but finally, we have this ghostly special within which to tell you Mason Faraday's ghost story. I'll read directly from Mason's email. Hello, and thanks for telling others of my old friend, the boogeyman. Now, for a ghost story. I was a kid when this occurred. The next story involves my godfather. When he died, the house and his belongings were up for grabs since he had nobody with him to leave it to. I grabbed an old World War II bomber plane toy, a Pharaoh mask statue, and a Darth Vader piggy bank. My parents grabbed other, more grown-up things, such as hats, his leather jacket, stuff like that. The piggy bank was automated. It would play part of Vader's speech to Luke in Episode 5 during the Cloud City duel. Impressive, he'd say. Most impressive, but you are not a Jedi yet. Then he would raise his lightsaber as the Imperial March played. Now this would only activate if a coin was inserted into the slot or if you push the button. Now here's the baffling part. Every night since I acquired those items, the bank would play by itself. My parents saw this too. The Vader piggy bank would play his line, then go back to dormancy. This happened for about 3 months. Until Mom had enough and put it downstairs in the basement. Since then, Vader doesn't utter a peep unless fed a coin or if the button is pressed. So, either my godfather moved on to wherever you go when you die, or he's still here and he just doesn't want to bother us. I personally believe he is still here with the other ghosts and that he wants to not anger us. I know he was only trying to tell us he's still around and that he loves us. But that bank bit was very repetitive and creepy. As always, keep up the good work and thanks for listening to my weird but true stories. Thanks, Mason. That was written by Mason Faraday, one of the guys in the chat. I hope you like that, Mason. And now, everybody get ready because it's time for the ghost of Dogman. If you missed part 1 from this morning's episode of Daily Dogman entitled, What's the True Nature of Dogman? The short version is that between 1966 and 1969, a family was besieged on their property by various, apparently supernatural, or at the very least certainly highly strange and frightening, phenomena. The father and older brother had been seeing what they called walking wolves at the edge of the property, which seemed to be growing more hostile and brazen, even chasing the two one time. The mother, young daughter, and younger son of the family, the latter of which is telling us the story, have all been experiencing ghostly phenomena like poltergeist activity, disembodied voices, and shadow beings. What we're about to tell you is the story of the first time all these phenomena seemed to merge into one phenomenon. Although based on the first-hand account of the younger son, this narrative has been dramatized with certain facts changed for legal reasons to protect the anonymity of family members who don't want this story to be told even 50 years later. Part 1 dealt mainly with events that allegedly occurred in 1966. This story recounts 1968 and 1969, when things really came to a head. We now rejoin the older son's version of the story. My father and brother had been growing harsher in their mockery of the ghostly events taking place in our home. It confused all of us why they expected us to believe their Dogman stories, but they thought we were crazy for having ghost encounters. However, one night, a terrifying thing happened to me that changed the entire dynamic in our house. I was asleep in my bed, and I woke up instantly knowing that someone was in the room and watching me. You know that feeling. You can practically feel and hear and smell them. You know they're there. I bolted up in bed and was instantly proven right. The problem was, this was one of those times when you didn't want to be right. Usually you're happy when you expect something to happen and then it does. It feeds your ego. You can brag that you're psychic and so forth. But when you wake up thinking you're about to see a monster staring back at you, and then you do see a monster staring back at you, it's even more surprising than when you weren't expecting it. So, I know for a fact that this was not a sleep paralysis episode. How do I know? Because I was able to move, and because I was able to scream, which I did loudly, very high pitched, like a cat having its tail stepped on, so loudly, so high pitched, and so long that my father had my door open while I was still screaming. I remember it in slow motion. My father pushed my bedroom door open, and the thing at the foot of my bed turned its head to look at him. My father's eyes met the eyes of the entity, and then suddenly, it wasn't there. It didn't fade out. It didn't turn into a puff of smoke and blow away. It was just there 1 second and not there the next second. And I could tell from the shocked expression on my father's face that he had seen the exact same thing that I had seen. Just to make certain, I asked him what he saw, and he asked me what I saw. Yup, we both saw the same thing. So, what did we see? We saw what looked to me like a German Shepherd, but a really very big one. Like a German Shepherd on steroids or something. It was like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of German Shepherds, and it was standing there like a man would. It had its arms to its sides, not in front like an animal, and its eyes glowed in the dark. I want to say red or orange or maybe yellow, but it was such an intense glow that I think labeling it any of those colors would be doing this thing's eyes a disservice. It was almost like a kind of color I had never seen before, if that makes sense. The thing seemed to really be there, and then it wasn't. And not only that, there were aspects of the way it moved that were just incorrect, as though it were in 3D while also being in 2D and also being in some extra dimensional form that our minds couldn't fully interpret. I remember my father telling me that from a distance, when seen outside, the thing really looked like an animal, but up close in the dark room, it seemed to him more of a ghost or spirit. From then on, Dad and my brother were equally as concerned about the ghost events as they were about the Dogman ones. They wanted to know every detail, as now they saw this all as some sort of invasion, not only of their property, but now their home as well. How do you defend against something that doesn't need to use a door to enter your private space? Our parents turned to religion. They invited both a local minister as well as a local native shaman out to the house, asking them both for advice and for blessings. The activity lessened for a while, other than misplacing my personal items, which continued as annoyingly as before. One morning, I couldn't find a school book that I was going to need that day. In its place was a banana. I brought the banana back to the fruit bowl wherein I found one of my sister's socks. I went into her room to put the sock back, but she didn't want to allow me to enter her drawer to get back the next part of the ghost's little puzzle. I finally just lost it, and I shouted at whatever was haunting our house, however many of the entities there were, and whatever they were. I said I couldn't stand it anymore, and it wasn't funny any longer. They had affected my sister's mental health, and now they were affecting mine as well. They had my father and brother completely paranoid about invasion, and they had my mother scared to go to sleep at night. I told them I was just sick of it, and I thought it was time to move. My sister felt bad and let me open her sock drawer. In there, I found my school book wedged in so tightly that my father had to get it out using a flathead screwdriver. That night, I awoke from sleeping with that same strange and horrible sensation. I knew I was being watched. I turned around, and I saw the German Shepherd man again. The entire scene replayed itself, and my father raced back into my room. This time, though, when the entity's eyes met my father, the Dogman turned into a kind of softly glowing mist and rose up through the bedroom ceiling, disappearing from our view. I said out loud, "It's gone now," but I don't remember thinking it before I said it. It was more like the words were spoken than that I spoke them. My father knew it too, and we all knew it for certain soon, as after that, things were normal on our property and in our house again. So, those are the details about what happened to us, but if you want me to explain what any of these facts mean, then I'm sorry, but I'm at a loss. I have no idea to this day what we had on our property. Were they really intelligent dogmen who could shapeshift or become invisible? Were they actually ghosts who could manifest as dogmen? Were they skinwalkers? We hadn't heard that term at the time, and the native shaman we had out there never spoke of such a thing. He said we had spirits who didn't want to leave. That was how he saw it. He didn't say they were good or evil, just that they didn't want to leave. My sister says that it was me throwing that fit that drove them off, by making them feel bad for the things they had done to bother us. If so, then they were creatures with a conscience and not truly evil. Even so, if I ever encountered them again, I would be just as frightened as I was as a kid. Whether those things are evil or not, they shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be able to do the things that they do. Their very existence is frightening, because it means that nothing we think is real possibly could be real. Everything about them is unsettling for that reason. And I think that's why my family is so scared of talking about any of this. To them, we're lucky it ended, and we should just be grateful and never think about it again. My mother, the only one to see them in the form of shadow beings, says that just thinking about them gives them energy, so she tries never to do so. I personally think that's a bit of a superstition, so I wanted to get this story out there. If you think like my mother, though, I would try to avoid focusing my mind on stuff that I don't want to see manifest in my real life. And that means, most of all, be very careful when thinking about the Dogman. We'll be back with a scary story from Dr. Death and PQ Ribber right after this.
Debbie, I don't understand your cosplay costume for St. Patty's Day Northeast Comic-Con.
I'm going as a leprechaun from the movie Leprechaun. If he was a, bikini model, yo. Hooray!
My grandma stands in my closet all night, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. Dear Scary Stories, I am an 18-year-old college freshman, but this story happened around 6 or 7 years ago when I was still a kid. My family lived in a house on the north shore of Long Island at the time, and my young brother and I shared a room painted white on the second floor. The windows faced east and south, so in the summer it was incredibly bright in there in the mornings and dark from the afternoons onward. That's when my brother and I would tell each other ghost stories as the room got darker and darker. Ghosts were our thing. We loved ghost TV shows, ghost movies, ghost anything. We liked real-life ghost stories, fictional ghost stories, Japanese ghost stories, ghosts caught on tape, and we even watched those Nicolas Cage motorcycle movies just because they had ghost in the titles. Because of all of this, I'm sure many of you will dismiss my story as the result of the overactive imaginations of two boys. In fact, I'd probably agree with you, except my brother and I saw the exact same thing. One night I woke up to the sound of tapping. I raised my head to look around and noticed that my brother was already awake, and he was staring at the closet door. He looked at me, frightened. "Do you think it's a rat?" he asked with a quavering voice. "That's an awfully tall rat," I answered, since the tapping did not seem to be coming from the ground level, but more or less from our eye level as we sat up in bed. "I dare you to open the door," he whispered loudly. "I'll open it second if you open it first," I suggested, knowing that my brother wasn't the brightest bulb. He considered my offer and idiotically decided it was fair, then got out of bed and made his way over to the closet, one slow, creaky wooden floorboard step at a time. He reached his shaky hand out toward the doorknob, and as he was about to grab it, another tap, tap came from inside the closet. He took a sharp, deep breath and almost fell over backwards in fear. "Don't be such a chicken, you little powder puff," I taunted him from the safety of my bed. Regaining his bravery, my now sweating brother reached again for the door handle. This time, he grabbed it and opened it. There, inside the closet, was our maternal grandmother. Why was my mother's mother standing in the closet? Then I noticed she had her eyes shut. She looked sad and held her hand out to my brother imploringly. The dimwit was no longer frightened. "Don't be scared," he said to me. "It's only Grandma." He took her hand, and she gently pulled him into the closet, then turned to me, her eyes still shut, and held out her other hand to me. There was no way I was going to go stand in the closet with my grandma, who I assumed was developing dementia by this behavior, and my little moron of a brother. I got up and walked over to the closet, but instead of going inside, I slammed the door and jumped back in my bed, laughing. My brother banged and banged on the closet, but I put a pillow over my head and attempted to go back to sleep. After a while, both my parents came in and let him out, criticizing me for ignoring my brother's shouting. "He was just trying to make me go in the closet with him and Grandma," I said in my own defense. This utterly confused both parents, which also brought their criticism to an end as my brother admitted that I was telling the truth. "What does that mean, with Grandma?" my mother asked both of us, and my father seemed equally interested in the answer. "She was in the closet," my brother explained. "She was lonely and wanted us to hang out with her." When asked where she was now, my brother shrugged his shoulders and told them she disappeared when I slammed the door on them. "I tried and tried to get out," he exclaimed, "but someone was holding me in." That was another mystery about this event. The door shouldn't have locked my dumb brother in. There was no lock on it. I brought that up, and everyone stopped picking on me, focusing their attention on that part of all this. My brother and I kept hearing tapping on the closet door a few nights each week for the rest of the summer. However, we never opened that door after dark ever again. The end.
Up next, a scary story from our hostess herself, Madeline Starr.
The Opera of the Phantom, or The Operatic Phantom. Dear Scary Stories, I'd like to tell you a story about how I became an opera singer, and why. When I was a little girl, my parents took me with them on a tour of Italy and Greece, and a few other places. I was 5, so I honestly only remember patches of it here and there. I do remember going to a beautiful old opera house at some point along the trip, but I don't remember the name of it, or even what country we were in. The part I remember is that I heard a lady singing opera that nobody else could hear. I kept looking around for her, but I couldn't see her. I think I must have been old enough to know what a recording was. I knew TV wasn't live, for instance, but I remember being certain that this wasn't a recording. It was someone singing a cappella somewhere in the building. Then the entire tour group I was with was led out onto the stage of the old theater. And I remember gasping in awe, having never seen a large stage from this angle before. It, to me at least, was the most lovely and exciting place I could imagine. And out here, the singing was much louder. The singing lady must be out here on the stage, I thought as I looked around. Some of the grown-ups were blocking my view, but I couldn't see the source of the singing anywhere. I asked my mom where the singing was coming from, but she told me to be quiet. I asked again, and she said there wasn't any singing. Then I saw her. I saw the singing lady. It was so long ago, but she was so striking. Her image is burned permanently into my memory. I can see her clearly. She was blonde. She was pretty. She was wearing some sort of white outfit, and she was standing in the balcony, looking directly at me as she sang. She finished her song just for me. Then she smiled and waved at me, with her fingers only, holding her hand still. I tried to wave back the same way, and then she vanished. After that, I remember bugging my mother to get me ice cream. That's the weird thing about her vanishing, that it didn't really surprise me. It seemed normal, and I just accepted it. I mean, her song was done. She turned off the show, just like the singers on TV. It seems weird to me thinking back on it, obviously, but at that age, I guess we're sort of more like cats or dogs. I mean, does a dog get so amazed by an electric can opener that he neglects to eat the food that comes out of the can? No, the dog is like, oh yeah, the humans use some magic device and pow, it's dinner time. 5-year-olds and dogs don't really need explanations other than some magic happened and then it was dinner time. But the older I got, the more I remembered her, appearing just for me, singing just to me. I never felt like that meant I had to become an opera singer, but it helped me get more interested in the music, and I sort of thought of her and imagined her rooting me on, whoever she was. Each time I rehearse, I feel her there, and each time I perform on stage, I search her out in the audience. But I've yet to see her a second time. And whenever my time here is done, and she and I are reacquainted, I hope I have the privilege of singing a song just for her.
The Dancing Closet Ghost, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. Last year, I moved into a 126-year-old house on the old money edge of a medium-sized city. I got the place for much less than most apartments in the area we're going for because it has a locally well-known history as a haunted house. As head of my own small business, I spent most of my time in the city and was initially only planning on using this house for vacations and as a place to get away to. Then, 2 months after buying it, my business took a sharp turn for the worse, and I had to sell my place in the city and move into the spook house full-time with no staff to help me maintain it. As stressed as I was over money, I was twice as stressed about living alone in a haunted mansion. Long story short, I was a bundle of nerves, jumping at every little knock or creak, and 126-year-old houses have plenty of both. I wasn't sleeping at night, which meant I'd crash out in the middle of the afternoon each day and wake up in the dark, terrified once again of every little noise. After about a month or 5 weeks of this, my body's exhaustion, coupled with my mind noticing that I hadn't actually seen or heard any ghosts at all yet, combined to let me relax. After a few nights of good sleep, I started to really enjoy the place. I caught a few breaks with my business, and soon I was able to get a new office in the city and not have to work from home any longer. The first night after working in my new office, I had intended to celebrate with a bottle of wine and a nice dinner, but I was so beat by the time I reached home I barely got my shoes off before I fell asleep in bed. I woke up at 2:24 a.m., noticing I was still fully dressed from the day before. I wondered why I had woken up and started getting out of bed to head to the bathroom in case nature's call had been what roused me. That's when I heard it. Humming. There was humming coming from somewhere. Not an electrical hum, not a vibration, but a sound like a person humming. Higher pitched, like a woman, or maybe a kid or a teenager. I held still and kept my breathing quiet to hear it better. I turned my head different ways to figure out where it was coming from, and then I headed for the closet. There was some lady humming in my closet, and this infuriated me. I felt no sense of fear as I stormed over to the closet quickly and flung it open. Inside there was, indeed, a woman. She had very pale skin and wore undergarments from another era. She had both her eyes tight shut and a big smile on her face. She hummed an old tune and she swayed her hips back and forth to the music she was humming. Maybe I felt no fear before, but I felt a lot right then. My first thought was, this is a meth freak. She's going to chew my eyeballs out and not even remember doing it, even though I probably had 9 inches and 70 pounds on her. I never saw a person I less wanted to tangle with. She turned her head as though looking at me, even though her eyes stayed shut. She held her hand out to me, and I admit, I shrieked like a schoolgirl. And with my shout, she was gone. As in, just not there anymore. I don't care how much meth you do. It doesn't give you the power of invisibility or teleportation, or else I just saw a ghost. I grabbed my pillow and blanket and finished sleeping on the couch downstairs with the lights on. All that next day at my office, I dreaded the idea of going home and having to be in that place with that dancing, smiling woman. I tried to tell myself it could be worse. She could be a frowning, violent ghost. I mean, at least she was happy. Didn't matter. I couldn't deal with the entire thing, so I moved in with a friend until I could get a new apartment. I tried to sell that dark ride attraction I had been living in. No such luck, not even with me cutting my price drastically. So I talked to the local council people, and they've cleared the way legally for me to open the house as a ghost tour. We'll have different events all year related to some of the famous ghosts that people have reported experiencing there. But this, right now, is the first, last, and only time I will tell that story of that creepy dancing lady in the closet. For some reason, I just don't want to think about her. I feel like each time I think about her, it makes her think about me.
Haunted by the UFOs. Dear Scary Stories, I'm a high school senior and a female, but this is a story about when I was 13 years old. My brother and I were out one night in our backyard, listening to a baseball game on his phone. I wasn't actually interested, but it was a nice night, and I used to like to watch the stars. So I was looking at the sky, and I noticed some of the stars begin to move around. I pointed this out to my brother, who also saw what I was saying. There were, I guess, maybe 12 or 16 of them. They were all moving around, so I couldn't really count them. At first it seemed they were spinning randomly, but then they started to move in formation, with all the lights on the left moving like mirror images of all the lights on the right. That got a whoa from both of us. After doing apparently impossible things for a little while, all the lights converged in the center, forming one much larger light, and then that light shot straight down, fast, and disappeared over the horizon. Again, two hearty whoas from us kids. "What's in that direction?" I asked. My brother was 2 years older than I was. He was allowed out a lot more. I figured he'd know. "There's trees in that direction, dimwit," came his sweet reply, adding, "You already know that. You've camped in those woods like 3 times by now, duh." "Oh, right," I said, ignoring the insults. "Do you think that thing landed in the woods, or do you think it landed past the woods? How far away do you think it was? Or they were?" I was wondering the same thing. I couldn't even tell how large any of them were, so I just don't know, he told me, still staring off where the lights had once been, adding with a smirk, "Why don't we tell Dad to drive us to the woods to search for the crashed UFO so we can find out?" That made me laugh. Our dad didn't believe in anything. He didn't believe in monsters. He didn't believe in urban legends. He didn't believe the reverend at church. He didn't believe the TV news. He told us all the time what a liar his boss was, and he most certainly didn't believe in UFOs. So that's why all of us were so surprised when we woke up at 3 a.m. that same night to the sound of him screaming that a tall shadow man was in his and Mom's bedroom. My brother and I both ran to our parents' bedroom. He was still panting in shock from the encounter, or the dream, whichever it was. My mom said it was sleep paralysis, but he said he could move the entire time. So then Mom said it was hypno something or other. Everything she said just made Dad angrier and angrier until he yelled at all of us to go back to sleep and refused to discuss it any further. Nothing was normal in the house after that. We had some sort of haunting that mostly seemed to resemble a poltergeist situation. It was a deliberately annoying spirit or entity that would constantly do things to bother us. Every night we would light a scented candle, and every night it would get tipped over, with the hot wax dripping onto the floor. It got to the point where we would anticipate it and be there to right it almost as soon as it was tipped. A favorite trick of the entity was to put my school books in the freezer on school mornings. They were never all that cold, so they couldn't have been in there that long. That meant whoever put them there had to somehow sneak them in while Mom was in the kitchen making breakfast. One time the thing wrote nasty things about my teacher in the margins of my homework in a handwriting meant to look like mine. I could see that it wasn't my handwriting, but my parents couldn't, my teacher couldn't, and the school shrink sure couldn't either. That event caused me problems that stretched on for years, of grown-ups officially worrying about my sanity. Suffice to say that by this point, I wanted to punch that stupid ghost in the jaw. It would manifest to us sometimes so that we could see it, at least sort of. 2 times we saw smoke or mist moving through the room as though it were intelligent, and on more occasions than I can remember, we saw the shadow of someone moving through the room when we could see nobody there. I want to be clear, I'm not talking about a shadow person or a 2-dimensional nightmare creature. I'm not saying the shadow itself was alive. I'm saying there was something that we could not see that cast a shadow on the wall as though it were a man. One night my parents were out with some friends, and my brother and I were watching TV. The thing came in the room and stared at us. It didn't think we could see it, and we couldn't, but it cast a shadow on the wall to the right, and I could tell it was standing directly in front of us. I played it cool and pretended to still be watching TV. Then I suddenly threw myself forward as fast as I could, holding my arms as wide to my sides as I could. I remember screaming loudly, telling that thing how much I hated it. Well, I crashed into the so-called ghost, and believe me, it was quite physical. Both of us fell into the TV set, knocking it to the floor with both of us landing on top of it. I kicked and punched and felt around for its eyes. I was so furious at how it had ruined my life that I wanted to make it as impossible for the thing to see us as it was for us to see it. If you've ever been spied on, and if you've ever been bullied, then you must know how angry I was at that parasite. My brother pulled me off it and told me we needed to banish it while we could. He started chanting something from some horror movie he had seen about how he banished the demon in the name of the Lord. I had no idea what he was saying, but I joined in screaming, "Get out! Get out and stay out! You're not welcome here!" After a while, we both got too tired to continue and collapsed back on the couch. Amazingly, the TV was not broken, but some of the potted plants had lost their homes. We cleaned up as fast as we could before our parents were due to get home. After we were done, we went out on the back porch to cool off a bit. That's when we saw them. The lights. The weird UFO lights or moving stars. They were back. This night, they did that same dance as on the first night we saw them, only in reverse. And in the end, they went back together again. But instead of coming down to the ground, they shot off directly up, seemingly into outer space. That was the end of the weird stuff happening at my house. I didn't realize till a year or two ago, but that night they left was around 13 months after it all started. I don't know if that's significant or not, but it lasted 13 months. I don't know what caused it. I don't know what it was. I don't understand the point of any of it, but those are the facts as I remember them, and you're welcome to interpret them any way you wish.
Don't go away. PQ Ribber and Dr. Death are up next with a truly scary story.
Can a living person have a ghost? Is told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. My wife and I just recently retired and moved to Florida when suddenly her 89-year-old mother moved in with us. Don't ask me about that. My wife and mother-in-law made those plans without any help from me. At any rate, we had the room for Nana and her live-in nurse, and they are both quite decent people, so I didn't actually mind at all. Plus, it made my wife happy. One night, 2 or 3 weeks after Nana moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night and noticed that my wife was not in bed. Looking around, I spotted her in the darkness with her ear to the closet door. Instinctively whispering, I asked quietly, "What are you doing, hon?" Before answering, she tiptoed quickly over to me and whispered in my ear, "There's someone in the closet, or something." I rolled my eyes and prepared to mansplain the meaning of words like hypnopompic to my life mate, when suddenly I heard it too. I'm not sure how to describe the noise, but it was the noise of something. "Hand me my shotgun," I said. "You don't have a shotgun," she responded. She was right. I had dreamed that I had a shotgun, though, if that counts for anything. I grabbed my Bobby Mercer model bat from under the bed and made my way over to the closet, noticing that it was actually open, but just a crack. I pulled it the rest of the way open and was stunned to find Nana inside, standing with her eyes shut. "It's your mother," I announced. "She seems to be sleepwalking." My wife cursed under her breath, saying it was probably due to the recent change in her mom's medication. Now we were both standing in front of the closet, staring incredulously. Nana held her hands out to us. We each took one hand, then she pulled us into the closet. "No, Nana, we don't want to go into the..." "Okay, here we are in the closet. What next, Nana? So then, Nana, her eyes still tightly held shut, did a little dance. A dance! This 89-year-old smiling lady with her eyes shut held us each by the hand and wiggled her hips to some music only she could hear. My wife and I exchanged confused glances as we stood there, and Nana danced. Then the dancing was done, and she ushered us out of the closet and pulled the door shut, closing herself in once more. I tried to open it, but it was stuck. "Oh no, now the door is stuck," I told my wife. "I'll get the tools and break her out of there, but first let me go take a leak." I left my wife standing at the closet door and exited the room, walking to the right, down the darkened hallway, to the bathroom on the left. I flipped the light on and was met by the sound of an 89-year-old lady screaming at the top of her lungs, "Turn out that light!" It was Nana, in the bathroom, in the dark. "Nana, why are you sitting in the bathroom in the dark?" I asked. "Why don't you mind your own business, buddy? Do I ask you questions about how you use the facilities?" This screaming attracted first the nurse, then my wife. Nana explained that bright lights blinded her and she was merely going to the bathroom. She said she didn't want to wake the nurse and she was capable of handling her own business. That satisfied the nurse's curiosity. My wife and I, on the other hand, were both far more confused than ever. We raced back to the closet, which now opened easily and contained no version of Nana. My wife thinks that some aspect of her mother projected itself into our closet when she was asleep, and that it was just an expression of her love toward us. To me, that theory makes little sense because Nana was awake and using the water closet while this all occurred. So, in other words, whatever that was in the closet, it was not Nana. It was just something that wanted us to think it was Nana. There was something in our closet that tricked us into holding hands with it. Something not human.
The voice outside the door. Dear Scary Stories, I'm not sure if this is a glitch in the Matrix or what, but the strangest thing happened to me last weekend. My sister and I share a room on the second floor in our house, and our windows overlook the backyard, which has a wooden porch located directly under our window. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and I was in our room listening to music and coloring in a coloring book. I was sitting at the desk by the window. As I had sat down, I had seen my sister outside on the porch, doing something with her tablet, so I assumed she was still out there, although I could not see her while sitting down. Okay, so I'm sitting there, coloring, humming along with the music, when all of a sudden, bam, 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 someone knocks on the door. I stand up quickly, in total shock, my heart beating 1,000,000 miles a second. Then I hear my sister's voice outside the door calling my name. I was like, "Oh my God, you jerk, you almost gave me heart failure. I thought you were outside." And at that moment, I glanced out the window and saw my sister, outside, still downstairs on the porch, still playing with her tablet. Everything froze. My body froze. Time froze. I stood there not knowing what to do because I didn't know what just happened. After a while, I started tapping on the window to get my sister's attention. When I eventually did, I gestured for her to come upstairs. She looked annoyed, but she did what I asked. Soon the door opened and she came in, asking me what the problem was. I asked her if there was anyone else in the hallway when she came up, and she said no. I told her everything, and at first we thought it was a glitch in the Matrix that happened to us. But after a few days of reading the internet about stuff like this, we're not sure if maybe it was a doppelganger or even a rake or a skinwalker. The door was unlocked, but it didn't come in. It needed me to let it in or give it permission to enter. I don't know what it was, but I'm very grateful that I saw my sister outside before I invited whatever it was into the room. Does Andy Warhol haunt a New York City pet shop? As told to Peter Bernard by Marie Mendaka. Read by Madeline Starr. One of the 20th century's most famous artists was Andy Warhol. He redefined what it meant to be an artist in many ways, since he never limited himself to just one discipline. You could buy Andy Warhol prints, watch Andy Warhol video segments on Saturday Night Live, go see Andy Warhol gallery exhibits, live events, movies, including one in 3D, and even attend his school, the New York Academy of Art. He was a leader in the pop art movement, which sought to legitimize commercial and advertising culture as art. Hence, Warhol did portraits of pop icons like Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, and a can of Campbell's soup. He had a workspace or studio that doubled as a party space, which he called his factory. There were 3 factories, the final one located from 1973 to 1984 at 860 Broadway in New York City, on the north side of Union Square Park. These days, that location houses a pet shop that works in conjunction with a cat rescue organization to get kittens adopted. Recently, one of the adoption group's volunteers was asked to stay after hours for a few nights. A cat just had surgery and needed medication. The volunteer came at 10 p.m., just as the pet shop was closing, and settled in for the evening with a hot coffee and a book. She gave the cat her 10 p.m. meds and set her phone alarm for 2 a.m., when the cat would get her drugs one final time. After that, she could leave because the early morning employees would take over when they got in. Although the store is not open 24 hours, there is a skeleton crew working around the clock cleaning and restocking the shelves, so the place is never entirely empty. The volunteer was deep into her book when some of the cats suddenly started meowing. She looked up and all of them were staring into the center of the adoption area, as if they were looking at a person standing there. The cats in the bottom cages were looking up, the cats in the top cages were looking down, and the cats in the middle cages were looking straight out. Some of the cats were pawing at their cages like they were trying to get someone's attention. The volunteer was more than a little spooked. One of the late-night employees came by and said, "Oh, the ghost is here." The volunteer was really freaked out now. "What do you mean?" she asked. "They do this every night at 1:30 a.m., he told her, chuckling. "They all wake up and start a commotion. We figure it must be a ghost." "Please tell me you're joking with me," she pleaded. "Nope. If you're ever here another night, you'll see." "As a matter of fact, I'll be here tomorrow," she blurted out. And so the two of them had a date. But with whom? Or what? The cats were back sleeping quietly, but the volunteer was too freaked out to take the subway home alone after that, so she just sat up with the cats until dawn. The next night, she felt a little silly about how scared she had gotten the previous night. She gave the cat her medication at 10 p.m. and dove right into her book, having put the episode behind her. The same employee she saw the night before stopped by and said hi, informing her, "I'll be back right before 1:30 a.m. "Yeah, right." The volunteer laughed it off, but he was making her feel a little spooked all over again. At 1:25, the employee parked his cart with the cartons of cat food to be unpacked and sat down with the volunteer, making some small talk. All the cats were asleep. Precisely at 1:30, the meowing started. First Leo and Milo, in cages very far apart from each other, and then a few others joined in. The rest of the cats ran to the front of their cages or watched intently. "They always stare right there, like a person is standing there," the employee said, pointing to a spot in the middle of the adoption area. "Must be someone who loved cats, right?" Again, the episode subsided after a while, with the felines calmly going back to sleep as though nothing had happened. The volunteer wished her nerves could calm down as easily. She spent the extra cash to take a taxi home that night, grateful that the medication was finally done. Are the cats seeing something that humans can't see? Are they hearing something that humans can't hear? Why does it look like they're all staring at something standing directly outside their cages? It's so creepy, and yet so cute. After a while, the volunteer had told her story to various of the other volunteers and employees around the pet shop. Because of the location, people began suggesting that it was the genius Warhol himself appearing to the cats. He was well known as a cat lover, having published a book in 1954 called 25 Cats Named Sam and One Blue that featured his portraits of cats he knew and loved. In 2009, his nephew published a book entitled Uncle Andy's Cats. You can probably guess what that book is about. If any ghost would take time out of his nightly haunting to hang out with the kitties visiting his haunted building, I think it would be the ghost of Andy Warhol. What actual hard evidence is there that the great Andy Warhol haunts the pet shop where his factory used to be located? To be honest, very little, if any at all. But wouldn't that be an amazing place for someone to have a seance or a ghost hunt to try to find out? Or maybe it would be more respectful to just leave Uncle Andy some private time to visit with his cat friends. Maybe they're starring in his new movie, The June Wedding Ghost. I grew up in the 1960s, reading romance comics about the perfect bride having a June wedding. Like my granddaughter talks to me about how she's going to grow up to be a princess with superpowers, who also has a doctorate and teaches at a prestigious university. I used to tell my grandma that I was going to grow up to be the perfect June bride. And she was just as proud as me as I am of my little granddaughter, because that was what my generation were encouraged to want to be. My dad was an executive and we had our own home. It wasn't in the richest part of town, but it wasn't in the poorest. Looking back on myself in those days, I think I was a bit of a gold digger. I definitely wanted to move up to the better side of the tracks, not stay middle class or regress. I was pretty, I could cook, but I couldn't type to save my life. So I put all my eggs in one basket and pursued marriage as my career. I never spoke about it that way back then. In fact, I saw myself as an incurable romantic. Like I said, I read a lot of romance comics, which in those days encouraged this behavior. They were written by men, after all, probably ones unhappy with their real-life wives, hoping to train the next generation to be more to their liking. As you can tell, I became a feminist in later years, but I probably wouldn't have if a ghost hadn't ruined my wedding day. My first serious boyfriend was named James, but I don't want to mention his last name because you may have heard of his family. He and I dated in the most formal of ways, and I was delighted when he formally asked my father for formal permission to marry me, formally. It was a plot from one of my comics, minus the drama. Now add the drama. James owned his family's mansion because both his parents had died in a plane accident 2 years prior. He waited 1 full year after their death before asking me out for the first time, out of respect to them. James missed his mother terribly and spoke of her often. There was a huge portrait of her over the fireplace in his home, or the main fireplace, I should say. I asked him one time why it was not a painting of both of his parents, and he just looked at me like I was insane. My parents were very eager for me to marry James, partially because it meant our family status was about to rise, and partially because it meant they could make a little money renting out my room. It would have been improper in those days for me to move in with James before the wedding, but my parents certainly wouldn't have minded. They, behind my and James's back, had begun moving some of my things over to his mansion. They really were characters. So one time, the two of them were carrying boxes of books into a room that James had said I could have as a private study, and a bookcase fell over onto my father. He saw it coming and wasn't hurt by it, but neither of them could figure out how it happened. Another time they said they entered the room to find all of my belongings taken out of the boxes and strewn all over the floor. Outraged, they stormed into James's study, which he never liked to be disturbed in, and demanded to know why he had done such a terrible thing. James, bewildered, returned to the room to find a number of my books of poetry piled up in the center of the room, on fire. The three of them worked together to put out the fire, all of them realizing that something weird was going on here. I began to be nervous to visit him at his house, and dreaded the idea that I would have to move in there soon. The giant portrait of his mother was oppressive enough, but there were smaller portraits in nearly every room, including bathrooms. It seemed like some sort of otherworldly monitoring system. I had never felt so paranoid in a place, or so unliked. It was flat out terrifying every single moment. I would shiver every time I left there, and take a deep breath of relief to be free once more. One time when I went to his place for a drink in front of the fire, which meant in front of the giant glowering portrait of his mother, I swear to you, the rug caught fire. A spark flew out in a way that seemed most unlikely. As I watched it happen, the rug quickly caught fire. This one kept spreading the more we tried to put it out, and we were exhausted by the time the fire was spent. Another evening ruined. James changed after that. He started more and more to think that it was his mother who was disapproving of our marriage. I could see he still loved me in his way, but I could also see that he was terrified of offending, well, whoever it was that he had been offending. I attended a dinner at his house with a number of other guests, and before we were about to eat, James made a gallant toast to me, calling me his future bride. At that moment, his glass shattered, calling a halt to the evening's proceedings and resulting in us having to fetch the doctor to the house at once. James was fine, but it was such a terrible omen, even by people from the social classes who rarely discuss things like omens. I mean, how does a wine glass shatter when a man is holding it by the stem? It was only a matter of time after that until the wedding was called off. My mother, to her grave, blamed herself for the rude way she had accused James of messing up my things. But I knew it had nothing to do with her. I knew, same as James knew, that his mother didn't want him marrying me. But it didn't turn out to be a curse. It turned out to be a blessing, as I went to college, paid for by my guilty parents, and I worked a rewarding career in publishing for almost 30 years, as well as having a couple of brats and now grandbrats. And I didn't have to marry a man to pay for it all either. Although, I did that anyway, but just for fun. So, sometimes the scariest thing in your life can turn out to be the greatest blessing in the end. The disappearing wooden wall. This was the only thing that ever happened to me that I have no explanation for whatsoever. I'm going to hate myself, but this happened when I was in my early 20s, back during the end of the Reagan administration, or the beginning of the first Bush one. Mini suits had just come into fashion, and I was a young executive on the rise, so every morning you'd find me rockin' what was most fashionable. Weekdays I'd walk from my apartment to the subway, and I'd pass a construction site where they were building my new high-rise. They had a thick wooden green wall blocking us from seeing the work, other than through these tiny diamond-shaped window holes they cut out here and there. One of my neighbors told me the work would be going on for the better part of another year, but that was all I knew about the place. Then one morning the green wooden wall was gone, replaced with a chain-link fence. I could see the entire work site, which at that point was a pit they were still digging out. And soon enough, wolf whistles and rude chatter alerted me that the construction workers could see me as well as I could see them. Now, I want it clear that I'm not a snob and I don't have anything against construction workers or any kind of anybody. I never have had any other trouble with any other construction crew since then, but on that day they were terrible. I mean, everything they said was technically flattering. They were making it clear they approved of everything about my appearance. They went into great detail to be certain I was aware of everything they were noticing about me. My eyes, my face, my walk, my shoes, my legs, my hair. I could go on, but I'd start to get as rude as they got. When one of them began gloating that they had gotten me to blush bright red, I turned and shouted at them to stop. They were silent for a second, but then this very loud man started reciting his phone number to me at the top of his lungs, and the others joined in as well. It hardly sounds that bad in the retelling, but at the time, I really felt ganged up on and vulnerable. I didn't think they were being as funny as they thought, and I was very rattled as I rode the subway and all day at work. When I got off around 5, I decided to go to a diner for dinner, then go for a walk in the park at dusk before getting back on the train home. Really, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't back in my neighborhood until after the construction workers had left for the day. By the time I exited the subway for the short walk to my apartment, it was already dark. Even so, I decided to walk on the opposite street from the construction site on my walk. As I did so, I wondered again why the green wall had been replaced with the chain-link fence. Then I looked across the street at the construction site, which was once again surrounded by a wooden wall painted green with tiny diamond-shaped windows in it. The chain-link fence was gone. I crossed the street to look closer, not paying attention to where I was going, and almost got hit by a cab. I wasn't imagining it. The green wall was back. Idiotically, I touched it with my hands to see if I could feel it. I could. I found one of the little windows and looked through. There was no chain-link fence on the other side of this wall either. Then I noticed another thing that made no sense. The pit that was being dug this morning had been filled in with the foundation, and nearly the entire framework of the building was in place. Had I somehow walked down the block of an earlier time that morning? Or an alternate version of our reality? Was this some kind of trick being played on me? If so, how did they do it? The next morning, I walked to a different subway station to get my train, and that became my practice for the rest of the time I lived over there. Don't ask me whatever became of that spooky building, because I have refused to go down that block again since the 1980s, and I see no reason to ever change my mind on that score.
In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo, and it says Scary Stories underneath in the Kaiju Monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors, such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. Oh, I also should plug the new Those American Girls album. It's got Madeline Starr on it and Patricia Howdigi and Colleen Great, and all the songs are written by Those American Girls. This one has no cover tracks on it. The title is Those American Girls Turn Off the TV, and you can get it from the link or links in the description.
Come back for more scary stories.